Hello everyone, so these are just going to be a few videos to take you through the various stages and kind of things you consider when approaching the writing section of Unit 2 and Unit 3. So even though some of the examples may be unit specific, a lot of the skills are transferable, so you can apply, especially for this video, you can apply this to pretty much any task that you are given. So if we look at the writing mark scheme, there's 5 bands and there's 2 columns, and it's the 2 columns that we really want to look at. There's the communicating and organising, and then there's the writing accurately. And today we're going to be focusing on that idea of communicating and organising, because planning is involved hugely with that. And then in another video I'll talk through some of the things you can do to ensure that you are writing accurately. But this is quite in depth. There's quite a lot of complicated terminology here, so we're just going to make it a little bit simpler. And we think about it using 2 hands. Now, different teachers teach this in different ways, but most of you will have heard of the high 5 structure or the 5-part writing structure, and that's this bit here. So we're going to be focusing on that today, and as I said, this one is for next time. So let's just take a bit of a closer look as to how we can kind of apply this to our writing. So we've got our introduction. In our introduction, we want to include who, what, when, where, and why, or as many of those as are applicable. And the reason for that is we want to create a general introduction, set the scene, and map the way for the rest of our essay. Your introduction serves in a way as a topic sentence for the rest of your essay. It gives you an idea of what's to come, but it doesn't give you too much too early. And it makes your reader ask, so what, and prove it, which is what you then do in the rest of your points. Your points then need to be well developed, and you want to make sure that you are including examples, and we'll talk about those as well when we get to sort of the planning stages of this. The third point ideally should be a counter-argument, especially in the kind of task we're looking at today. So if it's applicable, try and include a counter-argument, and you can do that as simply as writing a sentence with a certain type of connective, but if you can go into more detail, then that's great. And finally, for your conclusion, you want to be making sure that you've answered the question, but you also want to make sure that you link back to your introduction in some way, and again we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail now. So how do we actually apply this to a question? Because it's all very well talking about this structure, but until you apply it to a question, it's still kind of a little bit confusing. And I'm going to talk you through some steps that I use when thinking about planning and when thinking about refining my ideas. Now, bear in mind, different teachers will teach this in different ways, and there is no correct way to plan. It's quite an individual process. But the most important thing you need to take away from this is that you have to plan. So no matter what way you prefer, no matter what different teachers say, you take away the method that works best for you so that you are comfortable and happy planning, because planning is what is going to make your answer work for you. So this is the question we're going to be looking at. And this is familiar to a few classes because I know this has been used already. So parents should be allowed to monitor and read all of their children's social media, Facebook, Twitter, text, etc. Write an essay to explain the extent to which you agree with this view, giving clear reasons and examples. So step 1, we want to highlight the key words. So we've picked out the extent because that tells us that we don't have to completely agree or disagree. We could do something in between, and we can certainly consider more than one side of the argument. And reasons and examples. Now, something to bear in mind is that you have just completed a reading section on your exam that contains about 5 or 6 different exemplar texts. You can use those, and you can use the information in those to help you out. As well as that, as long as the information is plausible, feel free to make it up. No one is going to fact check you. They're far more interested in your writing skills. So don't be het up on trying to find loads and loads of real examples and trying to think back to some research, or feel you can't answer the question because you don't know a huge amount of information about it. The questions are designed to give you the opportunity to show off your writing skills, and the information itself comes second to that. Now we're going to mind map all of our ideas. Now the question that I've picked is particularly appropriate because lots of people have some quite strong opinions about this. So people will write things down like not fair or privacy. And if you didn't plan, these things would get into your essay and into your draft. Now, what we're doing here is we're getting them down on the page, good ideas, bad ideas, things that are just outbursts of emotion or just response, get them all down on the page, and then we can start to work with them. So I've got privacy, and perhaps people were not monitored years ago in the same way. And I'm just going to keep on adding to this now and adding some more ideas, and not really thinking too much about whether they're good or bad or editing. I'm just going to throw them all down and then see what I have. Okay, so I've got quite a few ideas written down now, and a nice mess made of my page. And your plan does not have to look perfect. It doesn't have to be beautifully developed in your best handwriting. It needs to make sense to you. That is the most important thing. And this is what this does for me. So the next step is to select the best ideas. So I'm going to look and I'm going to think, okay, well, not fair doesn't really work. There's nothing to back that up. I hate it as well, probably isn't the best. But the rest of them are pretty good, I think. I think I'll be happy taking on these guys. So if we tick these to make sure that now I know that these are the ones I'm going to be working with. And now I'm going to think about grouping them. So in terms of grouping, what I'm going to do is have a look and see if any of these ideas are similar. And I've already started to do this a little bit with my arrows. So I've said education is needed, and that definitely links with my counter argument that I thought about, this idea of helping with bullying, but also this idea of adults or parents not knowing how to use social media. So this certainly is all one kind of idea here. This idea of privacy and people not being monitored in the same way also works. This is a counter argument, so I'm going to circle this in a slightly different colour as well. So I now can see that I've got two main arguments and my counter argument, and if you remember back to the hand structure, that fits in with that idea. And I do have up here a wealth of examples that I could pick from as well, to come up with some kind of evidence. So now I've grouped them. My next step is to decide on an order. And for that, I want to think about my hand structure. So my first point really should be the one that came to me first, I think. I think it should be the one, the more obvious one. So I'm going to go with this idea of privacy. That's going to be my number one. And I'm going to have that by there. Because then I can develop that with this idea of people not being monitored in the same way, which kind of leads me nicely on to the idea then of adults and parents, because if they weren't monitored in the same way, then they're not going to have the same idea of how to use these outlets. So then I've got this idea of adults not knowing what they're doing. So parents, lack of knowledge. And what I'm doing by doing this as well is I'm starting to summarize from here to here, and I'm picking out that key factor that I need to include, and that will form the basis of my topic sentence, which is really useful as well. And finally then I've got this counter argument here, so the idea of helping with bullying, so this is going to be positive and it'll help with bullying, so help to target bullying. And in both of these then I can start to talk about this idea of education, which I think will push my answer one step further. And then I've got my conclusion. So my next kind of stage after this is to think about detail. Now I've got quite a bit of detail here already, but I could think about some more examples. So this is an anecdote, or this is actually just an example of something that I read in the news about a woman getting fired over a tweet. And I quite like that example, and if I feel it's relevant, then I could include that. Any kind of anecdotal evidence about me using social media or parents get involved in social media, I could include that in places. And I'm just going to kind of add in little stars and symbols as to where I could add these things in. Okay, and there could be a whole load more stuff that I could add in, and it's likely that I will think of that while I'm writing, but now I've got that extra layer of detail, so I know that in certain paragraphs I want to include some kind of example or a statistic or a fact, and I still have this list here to help me out too. So I made a right old mess of my page, but this is starting to make some real sense to me. And I've now definitely got 3 developed points, things I can include in them, some idea of how to start my topic sentence, or at least what to think about with my topic sentence. And now the last thing to think about is the introduction and the conclusion. So I need to make sure that I'm answering my W questions. And I could either do that by writing some W's down the side of my page, like this, and then writing some answers next to them, or just maybe thinking about that and then writing a few sentences and working with those. And then my conclusion, I need to make sure that I've answered the question. Now, I'm not going to plan this in any level of detail because I need to really write my essay before I know how I'm going to finish this for certain. But I need to make sure that I'm answering the question, and then some kind of phrase or statistic or some kind of content from the introduction I want to include in the conclusion, because it again shows this idea of whole text structure. So this is my plan, and this is what I've done, and this won't take you a huge amount of time. I mean, this has taken me really, especially with me talking through it, under 10 minutes, probably 5 to 10 minutes. And I've gone from just having a whole load of ideas in my head that have no sense of structure to having several developed points with this idea of topic sentences, with this idea of using examples and development, and thinking about whole text structuring as well. And it's a combination of using the concept of a mind map and getting everything down on the page and then refining that, along with the idea of the 5-paragraph writing structure, or the high 5. So hopefully now, when you approach a new task, you're going to feel a little bit happier about developing it into an essay question. And hopefully you'll feel a little bit more confident now about approaching future tasks in terms of the structure. In the next video, I'll be talking about the other side of the mark schemes, talking more about writing accurately rather than this particular structure. As some revision practice, I would recommend just going onto a website, finding some examples of debating topics or topics that clearly have 2 sides to them, and just making these 5-point writing structures, these 5-point essay plans over and over again, following that high 5 structure, because the more you do it, the easier it gets. So that's all from me, and I will see you in the next video.